key concepts. The first concept is the sample size, which is the number of people responding to a particular question that is collected for a specific indicator per supervision area. This is what many people refer as to the number used in your denominator when calculating indicators. But again, in the context of LQAS, the sample size is for a supervision area. We will also refer to the total sample size for the catchment area as the aggregated sample size from all supervision areas. That is, if for instance, the project defines 5 supervision areas and 19 observations have been taken in each supervision area, then the total sample size would be 95, the result of 19 times 5. The second key concept we want to bring up to your attention is coverage benchmark. Coverage benchmark for an indicator is a predetermined level of coverage that the project aims to reach at a specific time period within the life of the project. The third key concept is the average coverage. The average coverage for an indicator is the number of people in the sample who responded correctly to a question divided by the total number of people responding to that question. And finally, the decision rule tells us whether an individual supervision area reaches the coverage benchmark or average coverage, or if it is below the coverage benchmark or the average. We will look at an example in a few more slides ahead to better understand all these key concepts. This LQAS table will let us identify the decision rule based on the sample size per supervision area located in the rows of this table, and the coverage benchmark or average coverage located in the columns of this table. With these two pieces of information, we will be able to identify that other third piece of information, which is the decision rule. With these three pieces of information, and with the data collected from the survey, we will be ready to analyze the data and make informed decisions. So, for instance, if we have a coverage benchmark of 80% and a sample size of 19 per supervision area, the decision rule will be at the intersection of these two parameters, that is 13. For the purpose of using this table, coverage benchmarks or average coverage rates get rounded to the nearest upper level found in this table. So what can we do with this information? Let's take a look at a decision tree used when analyzing LQAS data. As we collect data from each supervision area and for a specific indicator or set of indicators, we will be able to obtain the number of correct responses for each indicator we look at. If the decision rule is met, that is, if the number of correct responses is greater than or equal to the decision rule value, then we can classify the performance in that supervision area as adequate or low risk supervision area, depending on the indicator being assessed. Conversely, if the decision rule is not met, that is, if the number of correct responses is less than the decision rule value, then we can classify the performance in that supervision area as a priority or a high-risk supervision area, depending again on the indicator being assessed. So as you can see, the decision rule, which is determined by the sample size and the coverage benchmark, in this case 80%, will determine the status of the performance at the supervision level given the number of correct responses obtained during the data collection for the indicator being assessed. Once again, for our particular example, if we have a coverage of 80% a coverage benchmark of 80% and a sample size of 19 in a supervision area, then the decision rule will be 13. As you can see on the left-hand side of this diagram, if the performance is classified as adequate, then no additional intervention is needed, and the decision would be to continue the strategies being used. On the other hand, if the performance is classified as priority, then an intervention will be needed in order to change or correct the strategy so the supervision area for a particular indicator being assessed can become adequate after the intervention. Let's take a look at an example to help us understand this decision tree and analysis. Let's assume that we are assessing the number of deliveries attended by a clinically trained provider in our project catchment area, and that this catchment area has been divided into 5 supervision areas, A, B, C, D, and E. From the number of correct responses, 42 in the yes column, and the total sample size, 95, we found out that 44.2% of deliveries get attended by a clinically trained provider. This is the average coverage for the entire catchment area. This average coverage is a result of dividing 42 over 95, 42 being the total number of correct responses for those deliveries that have been attended by a clinically trained provider, and 95 the total sample size. Let's also assume that based on careful discussions with project stakeholders during the detailed implementation plan preparation, which included information from secondary data for the entire province and the whole country, we have established a coverage benchmark of 75% of deliveries that should get attended by a clinically trained provider. In other words, this is what we aim to achieve: 75% of deliveries attended by a clinically trained provider. And as you can see from this table, we know that the sample size used in each supervision area for this particular indicator has been always 19. So based on this information, we can go back to the LQAS table for decision rules and identify that for our average coverage of 44.2%, that is the column marked 45%, and with a sample of 19, we will have a decision rule of 6. Once again, for the purpose of using the LQAS table for decision rules, coverage rates will get rounded up to the nearest upper value that can be found in the table. Likewise, for our coverage benchmark of 75%, and with a sample size of 19 per supervision area, we will have a decision rule of 12. Let's take a look at those supervision areas that are below the average coverage, that is, those supervision areas which their correct answers are below 6. With the information from the survey data collected, we can quickly see that supervision area D, highlighted in red, falls below the decision rule of 6 for the average coverage of 44.2%. The rest of the supervision areas are above this decision rule, as their number of correct responses are all higher than 6. Let's take a look now at the decision rule of 12, which correspond to the benchmark of 75% that we want to achieve. When we take a look at those supervision areas that are below the coverage benchmark, that is, those supervision areas which their correct answers are below 12, then we can quickly identify that supervision areas A, C, and E, the ones highlighted in yellow, fall below the decision rule of 12 for the coverage benchmark of 75%.